Sit down. I already poured your drink. You again, another case keeping you up at night. No, that's not the face you make when a case keeps you up. That's the face you make when a friend calls you at midnight and you don't know what to tell them. Go ahead, I've got time.
You're not wrong, Vesper. This one's not a case, it's personal. A buddy of mine, Nate, called me about 6 months ago, middle of the night, didn't want to hire me, didn't need surveillance or background checks. He just needed to talk. His girlfriend Sarah had done something that afternoon. Something small, something petty, honestly. She'd left the TV on, cartoons, full volume, that's it. But that one stupid little act of defiance, it cracked open something neither of them had been willing to look at. And once it was open, there was no closing it. Let me start from the beginning. Nate and Sarah had been together about 3 years when all this happened. Good couple, solid. Sarah was the kind of person who kept everything running, worked full time, managed the house, walked the dogs every morning before sunrise. Nate worked construction, long hours, and between the two of them they'd built a decent life. Small house, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. Then Nate's father had a stroke. His name was Frank, and I need you to understand something about Frank before we go any further. Frank was not a good man. He was the kind of man who never let his wife learn to drive because he believed that was a form of control he was entitled to. The kind of man who would sit in his chair and wait for his wife to come take off his boots, because in his mind that was her job, not a request, a requirement. But it went deeper than that, much deeper. There were things Frank had done behind closed doors, things that went beyond cruelty into something criminal, the kind of things that should have put him behind bars for a very long time. The kind of things that, if I told you the details, you would ask me why anyone in that family ever spoke to him again. I asked Nate that exact question once. He just went quiet for a long time and said, "He's my dad." And I didn't push it because I've learned that family loyalty doesn't follow logic. It follows gravity. It pulls you down and you don't even realize you're sinking. So Frank had his stroke, and despite everything, despite all of it, the family showed up for him. Nate's mother couldn't handle Frank full-time on her own, so they worked out an arrangement. Frank would stay at Nate and Sarah's place for roughly half the month, then rotate back to his mother's house for the other half. Sarah agreed to it. She didn't want to, but she loved Nate, and she could see how much this weighed on him. She set one boundary, just one. Put your dishes in the sink when you're done eating. That's it. Not wash the dishes, not clean up after yourself. Just move the plate from the table to the sink. A 5-second task. Something a child could do. Frank was physically capable of doing this. After his stroke, he'd lost some mobility, but he could walk. He could feed himself. He could operate a TV remote. He could get up from his chair, carry a plate 3 feet, and set it down in the sink. He chose not to. Every single day, Sarah would come home from work and find Frank's dishes on the table, his used napkins, his food wrappers, his coffee cups with rings stained into the wood, just sitting there, waiting for her. Nate told his father, multiple times, "Dad, don't leave that stuff for Sarah to clean up." Frank would nod, maybe grunt something that could pass for agreement, and the next day, the dishes would be right back on the table. Now, in my line of work, you learn to read behavior, and what Frank was doing wasn't laziness. It wasn't forgetfulness, it wasn't confusion from the stroke. It was a message, the same message he'd been sending his entire life. You clean up after me, that's your job. He'd done it to his wife for 40 years, he'd done it to his children, and now he was doing it to Sarah. It was passive aggression elevated to an art form, quiet, deniable, and absolutely deliberate. Sarah knew what it was. She'd seen the pattern. She'd watched how Frank treated Nate's mother, how he expected women to serve him without question. And every plate left on that table was Frank's way of saying, "I don't respect you, I don't respect your home, and there's nothing you can do about it."
Some men build prisons out of dinner plates and silence.
For weeks, Sarah tried to handle it the right way. She asked Nate to talk to his father again. Nate did. Nothing changed. She tried being direct with Frank herself, polite, firm, clear. Frank would look at her with this flat expression, like she was speaking a language he didn't understand. Then the next morning, same thing. Plate on the table, coffee cup leaving another ring. Sarah started dreading coming home. Her own house, the place she'd worked to pay for, cleaned on her days off, decorated with things she loved. She was dreading walking through her own front door because she knew what would be waiting for her on that kitchen table. And here's what made it worse. She couldn't talk about it without feeling insane. Because if you tell someone my boyfriend's father won't put his dishes in the sink, it sounds trivial, it sounds like nothing. People would say just wash them, it takes 30 seconds. And they'd be right, it does take 30 seconds. But it wasn't about the dishes. It was never about the dishes. It was about a man who had spent his entire life making other people serve him, and the fact that Sarah, this strong, capable, independent woman, was now one of those people. Every plate she picked up was a small surrender, and Frank knew it. That's why he kept doing it. The mental gymnastics Sarah was performing to get through each day were Olympic level. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she was doing it for Nate. She told herself Frank was old and sick and maybe she was overreacting. She told herself all the things women tell themselves when they're trying to coexist with a man who has never respected a woman in his life. But here's the thing about mental gymnastics. Eventually, you get tired, and Sarah got tired. One morning, Nate had already left for work. Frank was in the living room watching his shows, because he could operate the remote just fine when it was something he wanted. Sarah was putting on her shoes, about to leave for work, and she looked at the table. There it was, last night's plate, a crumpled paper towel, a glass with dried orange juice stuck to the bottom. Something in her shifted, not broke, shifted. Like a gear clicking into a new position. She walked over to the TV, picked up the remote, scrolled through the channels until she found it. Looney Tunes, classic Looney Tunes. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Wile E. Coyote getting flattened by an anvil. She turned the volume all the way up. 100%. Then she put the remote in her purse, grabbed her keys, and walked out the front door. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's petty, and you're right. It was petty. Sarah would be the first to tell you that. Looney Tunes at full blast isn't justice. It's a tantrum with a punchline. But sometimes the pettiest thing you've ever done is the thing that finally makes you see clearly. Sarah drove to work that morning, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than dread. She felt, and these are her words according to Nate, she felt awake, like she'd been sleepwalking through the situation and the absurdity of what she'd just done snapped her out of it. Because here's the question that hit her in the car. Why am I fighting a passive-aggressive war with a man who should not be in my home? This wasn't a disagreement about dishes. This wasn't a personality clash with a difficult relative. This was a woman who had allowed a man with a history of abuse so severe it would make your stomach turn, to live in her home, eat at her table, and disrespect her daily. And her biggest act of resistance was cartoon sound effects. That's when the real shift happened. Not at the TV, in the car. She started thinking about all the things she'd been pushing down, the reality of who Frank was, not who the family pretended he was, not the version they'd constructed to justify showing up at the hospital, but who he actually was, the things he'd done to his wife. The things he'd done to people who couldn't protect themselves, the things the family knew about but never spoke of because speaking of them would mean making a decision, and decisions are hard. Sarah made a decision that day. When she got home that evening, the Looney Tunes were off. Frank had apparently figured out the TV eventually, or rather, Nate had come home after work and turned everything off, but the dishes were still on the table. Of course they were. Sarah didn't pick them up. She walked past them, set her bag down, changed out of her work clothes, fed the dogs, and then she went to the kitchen and looked Frank directly in the eyes. "Clean this up before I get home tomorrow," she said. Frank stared at her, that same flat expression. The next day, same thing, dishes on the table, food wrappers, a used coffee cup. Sarah lost it. She walked into the living room where Frank was sitting and she unloaded. Months of frustration, months of silence, months of pretending this arrangement was working. She asked him point blank, "Do you expect me to clean up after you?" And Frank, and this is the part that still gets me, Frank said yes. No hesitation, no embarrassment, no attempt to pretend otherwise. Just yes, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she'd asked him if water was wet. And that one word, that honest, unguarded, entitled yes, was the realization moment, not for Sarah. She'd already realized. It was the realization for everyone else in the story. Because when Nate heard about it later, he couldn't spin it. He couldn't make excuses. He couldn't say his father didn't understand or that the stroke had confused him. His father understood perfectly. He simply believed he was owed. Sarah looked at Frank and said something she'd been holding inside for a very long time. She said, "I know who you are. You're not a confused old man. You know exactly what you're doing, and you've been doing it your whole life. You've taken advantage of every person who ever tried to help you, and you will not do it to me. Not one more day. This is your last night in my house."
One word of honesty undid years of everyone else's denial.
Sarah left the house. She needed air. She texted Nate everything that had happened, what Frank said, what she said back, all of it. And Nate's first response, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Nate's first response was not great. He texted back, "I would never do that to your father." And Sarah, God bless her, texted back 5 words that ended that argument immediately. "Your father isn't like mine." That shut it down. Because Nate knew, deep down, beneath all the family loyalty and the guilt and the obligation, Nate knew exactly who his father was. He'd spent years building walls around that knowledge, rationalizing it, burying it. But Sarah's text cut straight through. There was tension between them that night. Distance, the kind of silence where you can feel the other person thinking. Nate wasn't angry at Sarah. He was angry at the situation, angry that his girlfriend had been put in this position, angry that he'd let it go on this long, maybe angry at himself for not being the one to end it first. It took a couple days before they really talked. When they did, Sarah said something that cracked the whole thing open. She said, "I need therapy, not because something's wrong with me, because I need help understanding how I got here, how I ended up doing mental gymnastics to justify having this man in my home." And she told Nate she'd been trying to tell him for weeks how she felt. She dropped hints, made comments, asked for help. And every time, Nate's response had been some version of, "We'll handle it," or "We'll take care of him until we can't." Which sounds reasonable on the surface, but what it really meant was, "We'll tolerate it until something breaks." Well, something broke. The part that gets me professionally is what happened next, because this is where Nate finally stepped up. He didn't defend his father. He didn't try to negotiate a compromise. He sat with Sarah and he agreed. Frank was no longer welcome in their home. Period. Now, Nate wasn't ready to cut his father off completely, and Sarah didn't ask him to. She understood that Nate's relationship with his father was complicated in ways most people can't comprehend. The son of an abuser doesn't just flip a switch. There's grief involved. Grief for the father you never had, for the childhood that was stolen, for the version of this man that only existed in your imagination. So Nate made a plan. He would continue caring for Frank, but at his mother's house. In the evenings on his own time, Frank would not set foot in their home again. And then Sarah brought up the future, because she was thinking ahead the way she always did. She said, "If we get married, he's not at the wedding." Nate agreed. She said, "If we have children, they will never meet him." Nate agreed again. 2 sentences, 2 agreements, and with them a line drawn so clearly that Frank could never cross it. Not because they were being cruel, because they were being honest about who he was. A few weeks after all of this, Sarah found a book. It was called Your Turn for Care, Surviving the Aging and Death of Adults Who Harmed You. She bought it for Nate, but they ended up reading it together. When Nate told me about the book, his voice changed, got quieter. He said it was the first time he'd ever seen his own experience described on a page. The guilt, the obligation, the way the world expects you to show up for your parents no matter what they did to you, and the way that expectation can destroy you if you let it. Sarah didn't just save herself from Frank. She saved Nate from a cycle that might have gone on forever, because left to his own instincts, Nate would have kept carrying it. He would have kept driving to his mother's house, kept changing his father's sheets, kept taking the phone calls, kept absorbing the passive aggression and the entitlement and the quiet, grinding disrespect, all because the man shared his blood. Sometimes it takes someone who loves you to say the thing you can't say yourself. Oh, and the Looney Tunes? Nate told me this part laughing, which was the first time I'd heard him laugh during the whole story. Turns out Frank never figured out how to turn off the TV. It played at full volume for over an hour, Bugs Bunny outsmarting Elmer Fudd, Roadrunner leaving Wile E. Coyote in the dust, Daffy Duck getting his beak blown to the back of his head, all at maximum volume, rattling the windows. When Nate got home from work and found his father sitting in the living room with cartoons screaming at him, he turned everything off and just stood there for a second. Then he started laughing. He said it was the funniest thing he'd seen in months. Last I heard, Nate and Sarah are doing well. They're talking about getting engaged for real this time. Frank is at his mother's house, and the kitchen table clean every night. Not a single dish out of place. Some people you carry, some people you set down. The trick is knowing which is which before they pull you under.
Looney Tunes. You know what I find interesting about humans? You'll tolerate a monster in your home for months, but a cartoon at full volume, that's the thing that breaks the spell. It's almost poetic. The most absurd thing she ever did was the most honest thing she ever did. Here's what I'm wondering tonight. What small, stupid, petty thing have you been too afraid to do? The one that might finally wake you up. Same time next week, I'll be here. I always am.